there's little doubt that the future in terms of providing the correct electricity, enough of the electricity, and enough to ensure that our jobs and our homes continue is extremely important. In a time when the climate change situation is changing all the time, is improving or disimproving, depending on your point of view, the challenges in providing that electricity is very much in the mix. So this evening is another attempt by Irish Rural Link and EirGrid to bring to you some thinking as to why we need to look at the future of electricity, and in fact, and why we need to ensure that we get it right. It is a public consultation workshop, so we know at least 90, if not more people have registered for this evening's presentations. You are very welcome. You will see at the bottom of your screen the chat. Hopefully you will get your questions in. We want as many questions as possible entered in on the chat website, and also email us afterwards at info@irishrurallink.ie. As I said, it is a public consultation. We know we need more electricity, but we need to get it right. And I know the commitment of EirGrid is to try and hear as many voices as possible and to ensure that it is correctly managed. So with that event, I am now going to start the proceedings with the usual icebreaker. James Claffey has something up his sleeves for us, I think. So James, if I may hand over to you, and then we'll begin with our guests.
Yeah, thanks very much, Seamus. I'm just going to start off with a little bit of housekeeping, if that's okay, and if people can see my presentation in front of me, there is the agenda for everyone. But just a quick bit of housekeeping, first of all. So this evening's meeting is recorded, and not the breakout sessions are not recorded, so please feel free to express your views and opinions there. Can everyone please turn their microphones off when presentations are going on, and also their cameras, because it's just a bit distracting for the people that are presenting in that. So that would be really useful. Thanks very much. And just if everyone could rename themselves and put their name and their organization if they're representing one. If not, that's perfectly okay. And just to have everyone's name just so that we know who we are addressing. And as Seamus has already said, can everyone please write in the chat if you have any questions or comments that you want to make. It's also important to note that all the comments are being recorded for inclusion in the final report. And if you wish to speak, if you just raise your hand when question time comes. But our panelists this evening are going to try address the questions in the chat as well, because we have a limited time this evening. So just in terms of the icebreaker, just give me 2 seconds out, and I'm just going to very quickly switch my screen again. So just to begin this evening's conversation, we're just going to start with a very quick Slido poll. So if people could take out their phones, their smartphones, or open up a new tab on their computer and go to slido.com. And when you go to slido.com, they will ask you to submit a code, and you can see that the code is here, is 120128. And once you enter the code, you will have this question in front of you. So Ireland should do everything possible so that by 2030, at least 70% of its electricity comes from renewable energy sources like wind turbines, solar panels. What do you think of this statement? Strongly agree, neither agree nor disagree, disagree or strongly disagree. And I can see people are submitting already. So we'll just give people a minute or two to submit their answers, and we'll use this as a starting point for this evening.
Okay, and while you're doing that, just to explain that Irish Rural Link is a voluntary national organization. We're responsible for some programs, but really our motto is sustainable rural communities. And I suppose what we've actively sought since our foundation is to work with all sorts of governments, agencies, whoever, in delivering the best kind of services for rural areas to ensure that people can live there. So I think, James, we may have that done at the moment, so that will give us some data and some ideas as to what you're thinking. I'd like to begin the proceedings by introducing you to Professor Brian O'Gallagher. He is Professor of Energy and Engineering at UCC and Director of the MAREI, also the SFI Research Centre for Energy, Climate and Marine. There's no doubt about it, Brian is one of the outstanding experts in knowledge and in research in terms of understanding the energy requirements and the challenges that face us. He has a list in terms of his career as long, and I'm not going to read it out, Brian, if you don't mind, but one thing is certain, he is clearly a person of massive knowledge and expertise. So Brian, if I may begin the proceedings by asking you to take the floor, as it were, and switch on the microphone.
Thank you very much, Seamus, and good evening to all of you. Welcome to the Southwest. It's a beautiful evening, and I'm looking forward to the deliberations. I'll share my screen so you can see what it is I'm going to say. Now, is that clear?
Yeah, that's okay.
Great. Okay, so this evening, I'm going to introduce things by giving a kind of high-level perspective regarding where some of this comes from. So why is it that we're talking about increasing renewable electricity? That's the question I'm going to address. As Seamus said, I'm from MAREI, which is one of the Science Foundation Ireland research centres in Ireland, and we're the research centre focusing on three topics: energy, climate and marine. And you can see at the bottom there, the MAREI Centre is hosted by UCC, but it involves many collaborating institutes across the country. And what we do in MAREI is research that addresses these three grand challenges that you can see on the screen. So the energy transition, climate action, and the blue economy. The energy transition to a low carbon energy future, climate action, which includes climate reducing emissions, but also adapting to climate change, and the blue economy, which focuses on harnessing our marine resources in as much as we can. So these three areas are our focus of research, and our goal, our mission, if you like, is to do excellent research that has significant impact. And we have three aspects to our impacts that we seek to achieve from our research. So we collaborate with industry, we support industry, that's one of our impacts. We also do research that informs policy decisions, nationally and internationally. And thirdly, research that empowers society. So we co-develop solutions with communities and citizens around the country. Including, for example, in the Southwest, our Dingle Peninsula 2030 project. So the science is very clear and has become clearer and clearer that climate change is happening. But we can see this in our everyday lives. We can see the increase in extreme weather events. And that's one of the manifestations, one of the clearest manifestations of climate change. We have global temperature warming, we have sea level rise, but the extreme weather events, in particular flooding in the Irish context, is one of the clearest manifestations of climate change. The science is also clear on where this climate change is coming from, why we have climate change. And that's linked to what we're doing as humans. Now, this is a representation of what's happened from the period 1950. We see that population rise across the world has led to an increase in energy use, and most of that energy is delivered through what we can see in terms of what's called fossil fuels, oil, coal and gas. And these release carbon dioxide emissions when they're burnt, and that's what's contributing to climate change. There are other elements of climate change, of human activity contributing to climate change, notably agriculture and industrial processes, but I'm focusing here tonight on the energy dimension of climate change. You can also see on the bottom that we have developed low carbon and zero carbon energy forms as well. but not as significantly internationally as we have with oil, coal, and gas. And our challenge, our collective challenge on the planet over the next number of years is to significantly change our energy system. We need to reduce consumption, we need to reduce the use of fossil fuels, and we need to increase the use of renewable energy. And as you can see, compared to where we've been in the past, this future is a very dramatic change. So we're at a very much a tipping point in terms of change, in terms of energy system, in order to deliver what's required to reduce emissions and avoid further climate change impacts. And it's clear that the science is pointing to this, but what's also clear is that increasingly citizens are demanding action. Our young people in particular are correctly putting it up to the rest of us to change the way we're doing things, so that we have a planet that we can be proud of, that we can enjoy, and that we can sustain ourselves in. In Ireland, what's happened over the last number of years, and you can see this is a graph going back to 1990, and the blue line represents history. And effectively what we've seen is over time, largely an increase in greenhouse gas emissions. So our policy system, our policy leaders, our industry, our broader society haven't engaged well to date with climate change. But what we're seeing now, and that's represented by the two green lines, is a very significant change in ambition. And this is a change in ambition that's coming from the government, because this is the effectively a graphical representation of what's in the climate bill, the revised climate bill, where we're looking to cut our greenhouse gas emissions by half between now and 2030, and then get rid of the other half between 2030 and 2050. So we have the science and we have the political leadership now. The science has been there for 30, 40 years. We've only recently seen this change in political leadership on this topic. So what does this mean? Well, when I mention greenhouse gas emissions, where do they come from and what do I mean? And this is a representation of the different things that contribute to our current greenhouse gas emissions. And you can see the role of agriculture, which represents about 1/3 of our greenhouse gas emissions. And the rest is different parts of energy. So electricity production on the top left, through the generating electricity from coal and gas. On the bottom right, we see transportation. So we use petrol and diesel in our cars and trucks. And then we have our homes where we use gas and oil for heating. So this is the challenge that we face, and this is where we need to effect change. And what we're talking about here this evening is the electricity part, but not only the electricity part, because electricity, if we reduce emissions in electricity, we can also use some of that electricity to electrify transport with electric vehicles and electric buses and electric trucks. And we can also have heat pumps in our homes, so use electricity in our homes. So in that way, electricity can become a significant delivery mechanism for emissions reduction. And when we look at the opportunities that Ireland has, we have significant opportunities, particularly in our wind resource, which is the envy of many nations in the world, both onshore and offshore. We also have other options and opportunities in terms of wave energy, solar energy, heat pumps, and bioenergy. So we have a lot of options, we have a lot of opportunities. Here we see hydrogen, renewable diesel, electric vehicles, and biogas trucks. So of these options, and why are we looking at renewable electricity in particular? Well, as I mentioned, with wind energy, we have a lot of it. And on the left-hand side here, you see our wind energy resource that's on land. And on the right-hand side, you see the wind energy resource that's offshore. And as you move through the colors from blue, green to red and purple represent the areas in Europe where you have the highest wind speeds, so the highest potential for wind energy. And this is what I meant when I said that Ireland has resources that's the envy of Europe. We also have a significant track record in delivering wind energy. So this shows a graph of what share of our electricity comes from renewable sources over the period since 2005. And as you can see, back in 2005, we got about 5% of our electricity from renewable resources. What I'm not showing here, which is, I should have added it in, is data that just came out last week from EirGrid. The figure for 2020 is 43%. This is a phenomenal achievement over the last 15 years. And effectively now we have an opportunity to build on that and develop further, because we haven't tapped into our offshore wind energy resource, which is very significant. And that's effectively one of the key new opportunities that we have. So the reason for developing increased renewable electricity is to tackle climate change, to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions. Because we have a very significant wind energy resource, and because we've been very successful in harnessing that to date. And that's effectively the message that I want to leave you with this evening. And I'm looking forward to the discussion. Thanks, Seamus. Back to you.
Thanks very much, Breen. And as you can see, a very interesting presentation in terms of the challenges and indeed perhaps some of the good points that you could bring into play in terms of meeting those challenges. The second guest, and just before I introduce, again, keep your questions coming in. We really need to see them, and we need to hear from you and your thoughts as we speak. And of course, you will have the breakout opportunities later. So I'd like to introduce you to Liam Ryan, Chief Innovation and Planning Officer with EirGrid. He prior to this, Liam was Interim Director of Grid Development and Interconnection. Liam also held a number of other positions in EirGrid, including Head of Integrated Single Electricity Market Transition, and many others as well. So Liam, I think it's very fair to say you have been immersed in this subject for quite a number of years. So microphone open to Liam. Take the floor.
Thanks, Seamus. Good evening, everybody. And thanks for the opportunity to come in and talk today to all the members in relation to how we're going to shape the electricity future. As Breen actually outlined, this is kind of a key activity that we need to focus on, and we haven't reached the full potential of Ireland and what we potentially can do. And really what we're now looking and asking is that we get the voice of everybody into the future of how we develop the power system so that we can deliver the 70% of our electricity coming from renewable sources by 2030, which is the government ambition, but it's also to make sure that we do it in the most economic fashion that we possibly can. So before I get into the slides, who are EirGrid and what do we do? So EirGrid operates and develops the electricity grid in Ireland, and we send power from where it is generated to where it's needed. And we do that in probably the most effective and efficient way that we possibly can from the development of the system. We're owned by the Irish government, and we're a regulated utility, which means that we operate solely for the benefit of the electricity users. And we don't generate electricity, but we bring the electricity from where it's generated to where it's been used. And we also operate the interconnectors between the neighbouring jurisdictions over to GB, and we're building an interconnector in the process of doing it down to France. And we run the wholesale electricity market. And what that means is that we actually set the electricity price on a day-by-day basis, and we're obliged to that with a set of rules that are set by the regulators. Key is that we have no vested interest. We don't actually own the grid, so therefore we've no vested interest in adding to it. So we want to find the best solution. Hence, we're actually out talking to the various different stakeholders to find the best solution for Ireland in relation to the supply of electricity and how we actually supply that electricity around the system. And just if I go to the next slide, so how the electricity grid actually works. It's on the left-hand side of the slide in front of you. The generation companies, they generate electricity, and they compete through the electricity market for the best price. And then over on the right-hand side, we have the consumers. So everybody in our homes that we consume electricity, and we go to a supplier and we're confident that the electricity will supply when we turn on the switches. And what actually happens is the bit in the middle is the grid. So you have ESB networks take the electricity from the grid and send it to everybody into their homes and into the businesses. And then we actually have the grid, which Air Grid actually operates. And our job is to make sure there's enough electricity there and that electricity is transported in the most safest manner as it possibly can be. And that's just a very quick high level view of how the grid actually works. So then when I move into why is electricity a solution to climate change, just building on what Breen has already actually said, is that as we burn fuel, which we used to generate for electricity in the past, and we still do a lot of it at the moment. So at the moment, as Breen actually said, we actually have 43% of our electricity coming from renewables, which means that approximately 57% is coming from other sources, and mainly fossil fuels. And as we burn that, it actually affects the environment and it causes climate change. And the solution to it is that we actually put in more green electricity supply generation sources such as solar panels and wind. And we also are trying to make sure that when it comes to the end consumer, that the likes of transport and others can actually move into using clean electricity from renewable sources to replace the likes of fossil fuel, and then have a further effect in reducing the amount of carbon we're emitting onto the system. And we've been asked by the government to prepare the power system to be able to work with 70% of our electricity coming from renewable sources by 2030. And in our response to that is what we're calling the shaping of our electricity future. And just in relation to the next slide. So Breen has already mentioned it, but from electricity, we currently have a reduction that we're targeting about 7.5 million tons of CO2 from the electricity system. That's reducing it down from about 12 to 4.5 million tons of CO2 from the electricity industry. And at the same time, we will be helping transport. If we get the electrification correctly, we'll be also helping the environment, the building environmental aspect as well, by also the electrification of the heat element, and then also the others, agriculture and industry. There's a reduction of 1.5 and also 0.5 needed from those sectors to achieve the climate action plan. So the electricity grid spreads all over the country, and in essence we actually have 400 kV overhead lines, which are on the graph in front here, the red lines. We have the 220, which are the kind of blue lines, and then we have the gray lines, which are the 110 kV. And historically and currently, a lot of the renewable sources were in very large generators that were located at key points, the likes of Money Point, and in and around Dublin, a few generators, and also in the Midlands. And we also had generators down in Cork as well. And now we're actually moving towards, and we have moved towards, more distributed generation, where wind is feeding in from, in particular, the west of Ireland and the south of Ireland, into the large load centres, the likes of Dublin. So in essence, like what we're trying to do is now we have more demand growing, and we know that we actually have our targets are actually increasing from the 40+% up to 70%, or at least 70%. So therefore we will need more infrastructure to move the electricity that's being generated around the system. And how we actually plan and manage that is going to be really critical over the next number of years. And we know we have options in relation to the amount of wind and solar that's connecting onto the system, or potentially connecting onto the system, but for onshore and offshore. And how we actually manage that's going to be really critical. And we know by 2030 we'll have about 10 gigawatts of additional renewable sources connecting onto the system, which is a doubling of what we actually have at the moment. And to achieve this, we need to make the power system more stronger and flexible to achieve those key targets. And that will mean that we need to build different infrastructure than what we have, and look at build new infrastructure. Some of it will be, as we're showing here, overhead lines. Others will be cables, and then it's also using smart technology as well. Okay, on the system. So how we're going to do this, we've proposed 4 approaches to achieve the 70% renewables target. The first is generation led, and that means we're going to put, or propose to put, and get your thoughts on whether we put clean electricity generation close to where the power is used. Then option 2 is developer-led, where the power system is more reactionary, its development to where it's been developed. So we respond to where developers decide to locate their clean electricity, the generation. The third option is where we use technology-led, where we use new ways and new technologies currently not used on the power system, and to transport the electricity across the system. And then the fourth is looking at demand, which is a flip of the option 1. If you think, and I'll talk about it in a little more detail, but it's really putting large energy users closer to sources where clean electricity is generated. And that ties into the government's policy on regionalization as well. But we know that when we get to the final solution, based on feedback from the industry, we expect it to be a blend of all 4 of the options, with maybe one being predominant over the other. But in essence, it'll be one of the 4 options here, or a blend of them. So we can't do this on our own, and nor would we actually think that we could. And key around this is that having the voices of each one of the partners is going to be really critical to achieve that 70% target by 2030. And the key is that everybody has a voice in relation to how we actually go about developing the actual grid, from the public to the regulators to ESB networks, in relation to how we actually start to build out the networks. And we look at ESB networks in relation to the distribution system, but also as the transmission asset owner, and how we actually build out. But it's really important that all approaches will need the public consent, and therefore we need to make sure that we are engaging extensively with the various different stakeholders and the public to get the right answer as we get towards the end. And if I just jump into a little bit more detail in relation to the 4 approaches. So the generation-led approach is really what we're looking at here, is that working with the government to determine the best locations where we can locate renewable generation. The preferred locations are close to strong nodes on the grid, and where also there's local demand, high local demand. And this is likely to, in this scenario, we're seeing that there will be probably more offshore generation close to Dublin. In particular, it's just a study we've done, but that could be in other locations potentially as well. And with less onshore generation in this model. So we're looking at potentially 37 transmission projects, or 38 transmission projects, costing just under a billion, just 0.7 billion is what we estimate. And of that, we see 4.5 gigawatts of offshore on the East Coast, and we see 1 gigawatt of energy on the island onshore, in addition to what we're seeing. And we see this has been really highly successful to achieve the 70% renewables targets. If I just move to the second one, just in relation to developer-led. So in the developer-led, we are continuing to connect new sources of renewable electricity in locations where the developers request that information, where they request to connect. And in that, we're seeing that this will require a large number of transmission projects to be built by the 2030 time horizon. And we believe that this will not be achieved for many years after 2030. And what we actually see is that in this scenario, we're looking at more onshore. So we're looking at 4 gigawatts of onshore, either in relation to 4 gigawatts of onshore wind, and then we're looking at 2 gigawatts of solar and wind. Again, the wind is on the East Coast. And we see that this is highly unlikely to succeed in relation to what we're actually trying to achieve, the 2030 targets, because of the amount of infrastructure that will be required to build. The technology that we're looking at here, the same kind of portfolio in relation to 4 gigawatts of onshore wind. We're looking at 2 gigawatts of solar and 2 gigawatts of offshore wind. And in essence, what we're really trying to do is to see, can we actually get a solution to connect the onshore wind in particular to meet the demands that we actually have growing in our large energy locations, and in particular in the city of Dublin and also in the other cities. And what we're actually seeing here is that the solution that we're proposing is that utilization of underground cables that carry high voltage direct currents directly from where the renewable sources is sited to where the energy is consumed. We're also looking in this solution as well as using new smarter technologies that currently are not really used on a power system. And we're making sure that we utilize those to minimize the amount of new infrastructure that we need to build. In this situation, we see that we'll need about 46 new projects, transmission projects, costing about 1.5 billion. And we believe it's very complex to put high voltage direct current circuits onto the system, but we believe it'll be challenging in the time frame that we're actually looking at doing, but it is an option that we're working towards. And the final option is the demand-led. So the demand-led, here we would be relying on government policy would determine the best location for large energy users to be connected onto the system. And in particular, we're looking at probably the likes of some of the large data centers, some of the large pharmaceutical companies, where potentially they could locate outside of the Dublin region. And we're seeing that by 2030, 27% of our electricity on the grid will come from data centers, or will be consumed by data centers. And this means that if we can put the large energy users closer to where the electricity, the clean, renewable electricity is being generated, it means that we need less infrastructure to move that. In this situation, we see about 41 projects. This is the cheapest of all the options at about $500 million in the overall transmission cost. Again, we're looking at the same generation mix of 4 gigawatts of onshore wind, 2 gigawatts of solar, and 2 gigawatts of offshore wind. And the key thing here is that the policies will need to make sure that large energy users do locate outside the main load centers we have at the moment. When we look at the 4 different approaches, and this is in the consultation documents, and we look at, you know, the colors that here we're actually looking at is that down at the bottom we're seeing highly positive is blue, and then highly negative is red. And when you just look across the 4 different approaches, we generally see that the generation led is probably the most blue, followed by the demand, and then the technology, and then the developer led is probably the most challenging, or the most difficult to deliver in the timeframes that we're actually looking at. So for this to actually work, it's not just the transmission network that we need to actually change, the lines and stations and cables. We also need to change how we run the market and how we actually operate the power system. So the 3 of those working collectively together, and we're working on trying to find the optimum solution to get 70% of our electricity coming from the new renewable sources in the most economic and effective manner. So if I just talk, first of all, in relation to the market, just if on the next slide. Sorry, the operations first, just in relation to how we actually operate the power system. So there's a huge amount of technical challenge that we need to manage as we actually run the power system with renewable sources. And the principal challenges is making sure that as we actually operate the power system, that it remains at a stable frequency. And as we connect on more renewable sources, they're actually operating at a different frequency to the generators that burn by fossil fuels. So we just need to make sure that all our electricity can be managed at very effectively on the actual system. And the other key challenge that we actually have is that we need to make sure the system is secure and reliable. That as we actually move power around the system, that's done in a very secure and reliable fashion, so that everybody has the continuity of electricity that we actually have over the last number of years, rather than having interruptions to the service that we actually need. And through that, we need to develop new technologies and new policies around how we actually operate the power system. And we are, that's part of our consultation as well, is to consult on how we operate the power system in the future. As we actually operate the power system, it's also going to have an effect on the price of electricity and what that actually looks like. So in essence, really what we're trying to do is evolve the power system and the market so that there's enough investment coming in, that there's enough investment coming into the power system, so that new renewable generation continue to invest into the power system. And at the same time, we want to make sure that evolution of the market is not putting an additional cost onto the end consumer, or at least it's maintaining the price at a reasonable cost, so that we can continue to develop the market at an affordable price to our end consumers. So therefore, when we look at the markets, we're looking at how each sector of the market needs to change and evolve so that we are promoting clean electricity connection onto the system. And again, we're consulting on how that market should evolve, looking at from the tariffs that are associated with the transmission system, the whole way to the actual single electricity market price. So with our 4 approaches to reaching the 70%, we are open to your views in relation to how this will shape the electricity system into the future. And we want to hear those views so that when we get to the final plan at the end of the year, that we have a plan that everybody can get behind, and it meets the needs of our energy citizens and the communities that we will need to build some infrastructure in or upgrade some of the infrastructure we have into the future. And our plans are to hear the views of all stakeholders. And again, I'd like to thank Rural Link for hosting the workshop today, for giving us the opportunity to get to talk to communities across Ireland. We're also working with Chambers Ireland to host workshops for the businesses across Ireland. We're working with the National Youth Council of Ireland to host youth assemblies for future electricity consumers. And we're also hosting industry forums with generation companies, developers, and large energy users and suppliers to get their voices very clearly in relation to what we're actually doing. We're also hosting civic society forums, including from academia, agriculture, and communities. And really, it's making sure that we're hearing everybody's voice. And we'll be also hosting public forums like the Citizens Assembly run by the government to ensure that we're trying to get as much information as we possibly can and as much insight and steer from all different stakeholders as we possibly can. And and in your area, we know that onshore wind and solar PV connections are really part of the mix that we're seeing at the moment. We're also seeing the Celtic interconnector is a key development in the Cork region. And we're also seeing the future potential around Moneypoint is a key area where, you know, recent communications around the future of Moneypoint will actually have an effect on how we connect renewables onto the actual system. But there's also, like in the Southwest, over the last number of years, we've actually had a significant amount of renewable generation connecting and transmission stations being built in the southwest in your regions. And just in relation to how we get your views in, so we have the consultation is open. So we have you can make your submissions by sending us an email at consult@airgrid.ie, or also on our website. There is a website portal fully available, and all the information is just on the slide here that we actually have. We also accept submissions coming in from post, because in essence we want to hear everybody's opinions in relation to how we can actually do so. We're trying to make it as accessible as we possibly can, and the consultation will run until the 14th of June this year. And just the final two slide shames, or 3 slide shames, you'll be happy to hear. I'm getting close to the end. Is just in relation to we can't do this on our own. There's no point in saying that we actually can. And with your help, we can continue to lead the world in how much of our electricity can come from clean electricity sources. And I think at the moment, Ireland is a world leader in relation to renewable penetration. And I believe that we will continue to be that world leader. And we can make a meaningful difference in relation to this global crisis. But it means that we accepting change, and there will be some local impacts. But what we're trying to do is minimize those local impacts as much as we possibly can, because these are going to be, whatever we do is going to be the benefit for future generations, and decisions we take now will be really transforming us for the future. And the final point I'll just leave you with, Seamus, and everybody this evening, is that we are committed to collective and collaboration on this to get to the right decision. And we want to hear from everybody as we shape the final plans. So thank you for everybody listening this evening.
Thank you very much, Liam. That was a really good presentation. I don't mind that it went on a bit, but I think it was extremely interesting. And I think a lot of people, both on the comment line and certainly in my own text, are listening to you, Liam, and have lots of questions and observations. So we'll come back to some of those in a moment. But before we do, we will now go to Bill Kelly. Bill is Regional Manager of Community Power. And they focus on the training and education of community groups in the preparation and presentation of their energy generation projects in the RIS auction framework. And building on that success, they provide comprehensive, community-focused, turnkey engagement covering a range of issues which Bill will share with you. And I'm really delighted, Bill, we wanted you on this panel from a community perspective. As far as we were concerned, communities do need to get involved as much as possible, and I think your presentation will show how this can be done. So Bill, if your microphone is off, I give you the screen.
Good. Thank you, Seamus. Good evening, everybody. I take it you can see full screen here? Yeah?
We can.
Great, okay. So time is pressing, so I'll just jump straight into the presentation. Any questions, put them in the chat box and I'll deal with them later on during the breakout session. So community power, our agenda, what is community power, who we are, I'll then talk about RES and then renewable energy communities, how we see the future, and then how we see the future unfolding. So community power, we are a community of communities in the energy generation and supply sector. We are 100% community-owned projects in the wind and solar arena, and we have anaerobic digestion and biogas in planning. We are available at communitypower.ie. I mentioned here, owned and operated by communities for communities, and our principal primary projects currently are Templederry Community Wind Farm, operational since 2012, Claremorris Community Solar Farm, successful in last year's RES auction, and Galway Community Renewables, also successful in last year's RES auction. The fourth company in the group is Community Renewable Energy Supply, trading as Community Power. And whereas the first three generate power and sell it into the national grid, the fourth one there buys it from the grid and sells it to homes, farms, and businesses across the country. And we received our gas license in November 2020. So I mentioned there that we sell electricity nationwide. We offer fair, transparent pricing, 1 month rolling contracts, so customers can leave whenever they wish without exit fees. And the money that our customers spend with community power, they know it stays in Ireland to help communities to develop their own energy generation projects. And we would say to individuals and to communities around, and indeed businesses around the country, be the change you want to see. Sign up at Community Power. I'll talk briefly about our flagship project, Templederry Community Wind Farm, 100% community owned. And it developed from arose from a community development initiative. It comprises 2 wind turbines, each of 2.3 megawatt capacity. So, and together they power the equivalent of just over 3,000 average homes. In terms of financials, the wind farm returns to the community 1.1 million gross per annum. And we believe that every parish in the country should have something similar, be it wind or solar or a combination of both. So who are the faces in community power? Our MD is John Fogarty, and a lot of people will know John. Noel Carey is our finance director. In the office, then we have Greg, myself, and Sarah. And that is, as we call it now, the main office, or the original office. And since RES 1, we have Claremorris coming on stream, and a lot of you will know JP Prendergast, the driving force behind himself and Pat Neary, the driving forces behind Claremorris. And of course, as we roll along with RES 1, 2, and 3, we will have other offices, regional offices around the country. And of course, you can see where this is going. We are developing into a representative association for community-owned generation projects. So I'll talk now a little bit about RES, and it is the Renewable Electricity Support Scheme. It's a state initiative to incentivize the production of renewable electricity. It is an auction-based format, and where sealed bids are invited from qualified generators or potential generators for the production of specific amounts of solar and wind electricity, and indeed hydro as well, for a specific time, usually for 15 years, and at a set price. It was introduced in 2020 and it's expected to run in its current format for 4 to 5 years. The annual auction, the RES auction, has two components in it. It has the community pot and the developer pot. Now, there, as you can see there on the slide, the community pot is much smaller, but there are less onerous conditions to enter into it. But it is an ideal way for communities across the country to play their part in meeting the 2030 and the 2050 targets while generating revenue for their communities. So this slide here, I've taken this from the Department of Climate Action, from their roadshow of last year, and it sets out as they would see it, the policy and where they would like to see this go. They say there that Temple stands alone at the moment, Temple Community Wind Farm, but they want to see, and they're being quite, in fairness to them, they're being very upfront about it. They want to see multiple Temple in wind and solar around the country by 2025. And remember, they don't have to be carbon copies of Temple. Every community is different, but they're saying, the department are saying, together with the players, the regulator, the Airgrid and with ESB networks, they are prepared to make it easier for communities to develop their generation facilities. So that's our flagship project, and joined in 2020 by Clare Morris and Tuam Community Solar Farms. Going on from there to having an overview of the community pot. It is 1% of the overall annual auction. The maximum size for a project is 5 megawatts. Minimum size is 0.5 megawatt. And to put that in perspective, the average home uses 4.2 megawatts per annum. So you're generating in 1 hour what an average home would use in 1 year. Projects have to be 100% community owned, and Community Power are lobbying hard to increase the size of the community pot. We would like to think that in time it will grow to 10% of the overall pot. And also we want to increase the knowledge base such that communities can, as we get larger and a more collective group, we can compete in the developer pot as well. The steps to become involved in the RES auction, they are basically, number one, identify a plot of land in your locality. Up to 20 acres for a 5 megawatt solar farm, obviously less for a wind farm. Apply for a grid connection assessment. It will cost 2,000 plus VAT payable to ESB networks. And when you do that, you're really applying to get a place in the queue for and a cost for your grid connection. Obviously, to make that happen, you need written approval from the landowner to have their land assessed, and ideally have a land lease option in place. Once you receive your grid connection offer, I stress offer here, from ESB networks, you are now in the queue and you've got a firm cost for your grid. And assuming that's a reasonable price for the grid, you can apply for planning permission and enter the annual RES auction once you have your planning. So grid offer, planning, land lease, your community cooperative constitution, and verified financials. Submit your bid, prepare and submit your bid to the auction. Assuming your bid is successful, you then have your government contract in your back pocket. You can work out to contracts and construction of your solar farm or wind farm. And bear in mind that Community Power is available to help any and all communities through any and all of these steps, right? And needless to say, we are building on the success that we enjoyed with Clare Morris and with Tuam in RES 1 last year. In terms of having a look at financials that are involved, this is a brief overview now. So if looking on the left-hand side there in the red box, in terms of expenditures, you have to get to the races first of all, and that's your 2,000 plus VAT there, payable for your grid assessment. Put that down, and then all the other figures can fall into place very quickly thereafter, in terms of your capital expenditure and your recurring annual expenditure. And you can very easily then move to the other side, the income side, and you can work out your potential revenue in terms of your bid price in the auction and what that will generate for you on a daily, weekly, and annual basis. And you can see on my sample here that this is a very viable solar farm project, generating gross revenue PA of over $500,000. But obviously we're available to do all these figures for any community, be it wind or solar, long before you go to the auction, okay? How you might fund that, and here are some ideas on that. So assuming you have a funding requirement of $3.5 million to build a solar farm, we're looking at two types of shares here, A and B type shares, and I'll just run through them very quickly. The A type share is an ownership share. It has a voting rights, one per person, non-transferable. The community will set the price on it. It will pay a dividend, variable. The board will decide that each year, your own local board, and it's targeted at locals. The B share, it doesn't have ownership rights. It doesn't have voting rights. Multiple B shares per individual, not transferable. Again, the community will set the price for it. It won't pay a dividend, but it will pay a fixed coupon with a fixed maturity date. In other words, that's your investment vehicle. So you can see there at the bottom that if you issued 3,500 of those B shares and 300 local shares, you can very quickly, very conveniently raise the necessary funding. These will obviously work this model will work in well-populated areas. For very rural, low density, low population areas, if there is a funding shortfall, you always have access to the Community Power Green Bond, and it's available to financially sound 100% community-owned energy generation projects. Moving on from there, we'll take a very brief look at the Claremorris project in Res 1. It was a collaboration between the Claremorris community, Community Power, and Mayo County Council. And from conception in 2019 to construction in Q4 2021, you're looking at 3 years. Now, COVID may push this out to Q1 2022. And here you can see Mayo County Council welcoming the project. And of course, from the local authorities' point of view, they were delighted because they're now going to get an annual revenue, a land lease figure from what was a disused municipal landfill site, which is going to be completely repurposed as a solar farm with walkways, and we're going to reintroduce native flora and fauna as well. This slide here will show you pre-res, from concept to construction, how long it took to build Temple Derry. Keep in mind now that you had the financial crash in 2008, which delayed everything. But that's pre-res. Look at Res 1 there for Claremorris and Tuam. You're looking at 2 years from conception to build out, notwithstanding what COVID might delay it. Now, we have a number of projects going into Res 2 now in 2021, and I'm just taking one of them as an example, Limerick, which we hope will have a turnaround time of just over 12 months. And but the point here is that there has never been a better time for communities to take the plunge and seriously explore RES the RES framework as a means of generating money for your local community. Renewable energy communities, otherwise known as RECs, not a great anachronism, but at the same time, it gets to the heart of the matter. The generic name for a community-owned company that will place a bid in the RES auction. It must comply with the rules as laid down by the department in order to place the bid. And the question you should ask yourself, how will your REC be structured? Who owns what, and how will it be run? So will it have open and inclusive membership, be transparent in operation, one member, one vote, meet the RES requirements and more, have a constitution that protects against mission drift, and appropriate asset locks to protect the community assets, etc. Options for consideration in terms of the res auction and your community. I mentioned earlier that the first step was identifying a plot of land. Your community, as you can see here in the second box, it doesn't have to be fully formed at the outset. It can just be 3 or 4 individuals just doing a bit of legwork. Applying for your grid connection assessment, similarly, 3, 4, 5 individuals. Once you get your grid connection from networks, then you decide, let's start putting the legal entity in place if you don't already have it, right? And start applying for planning permission, etc., etc. So in other words, you don't have to have everything in place from day one. And the idea of issuing those A and B shares I spoke about, that doesn't really come into play usually until step 5 or 6 after the auction. The future, how we see it unfolding. So from 2012, when Temple Dairy went into production, grossing the 1.1 million for their own local community. 2020, Claremorris and Galway coming on board in Res 1. In Res 2, we have just over 30 communities. Now, not all of them will make Res 2. Some planning permissions may be delayed, and there could be a spillover into Res 3. But you can see where this is going. We would say to people, to communities generally, be a part of the alternative economic development model. You can enrich your communities economically, socially, and culturally while saving the planet and meeting the 2030 and the 2050 targets. To put that graphically, starting with 3 in 2020, Temple Dairy, Claremorris, and Tuam, going up to, we expect, at least 10 by Res 2. And in Res 3, we see that number doubling at least, and obviously going into Res 4 and beyond. Keep in mind that we're looking here at 100% community projects, which are all 100% locally owned. And each one of those projects has the option, if they so wish, of having an ownership stake in Community Power, the retail selling arm that sells power out from the grid. And that becomes very useful when you have your own local farm, solar farm or wind farm, because you will probably want to buy from yourselves. So that option is there for you. And in other words, keep the money local. Next steps, we would suggest to communities, get in the queue, submit your grid connection assessment. That is the best best value feasibility study that you will ever commission. Remember, it gives you the cost of your grid connection, which will determine if your application is going to be viable, but it will also give you a timeline. We would suggest as well, sign up with Community Power for your home, your farm, your business. Sign up online at communitypower.ie. Be the change you want to see. If we can't answer your questions this evening, if we don't have time, you can get us at the office at any stage, myself or any of the other people that I mentioned earlier. I would like to thank our host this evening, Irish Rural Link, for the opportunity to present, and well done as well to EirGrid for engaging communities across the country on the development of our national grid. Thank you very much, Seamus. That's my presentation.
Thank you very much, Bill, and lots of nice comments on the chat in terms of the work you do and Community Power, and certainly some interesting ideas. I think if you look at Ireland and particularly rural parts, we've been very good at developing cooperatives, the credit union movement, we've developed the water schemes, we're very good at getting the communities involved. And it seems to me, listening to you, that is really the next challenge that you are putting out to people in communities. Some of the questions, and I'm just thinking of the breakout rooms, but I'll just ask some of the questions that are coming in. And indeed, I know as Professor Brian, you've been clearly answering some of those, which is brilliant. But going back to you, Bill, in terms of the Community Power, You obviously have the skills and the advice that you can give to people who wish to get involved in this. Is there enough encouragement in terms of policy out there to get people involved and to get communities thinking? Because certainly the figures you produced would be very enticing, but is there enough encouragement at official level to get communities involved?
I would say that last year in Res 1, in fairness to the Department of Climate Action, they took the first step and let communities in. And the very fact that voluntary players like JP above in Claremorris, whom a lot of people will know, and Pat Neary and others, and there are other folks at Claremorris as well, and other individuals in Tuam. The very fact that with a lot of help from John Fogarty and the team in Community Power, we were able to get the applications together, get the grid connections, get planning, and get the application, the bids into Res, and we came out the other side of it. And we can now, dare I say it, Claremorris and Tuam, they have their government contracts now in their back pocket, right? And we will be inviting communities up to Tuam and Claremorris after COVID, and they can see the build out of the wind farm or the solar farms. And we'd say to communities, we are available to talk, right? Our mission is very definitely to see multiple projects across the country. We have strength in numbers, and there is no good reason why communities shouldn't take advantage of what EirGrid are very rightly and properly doing, telling us that the grid size is going to double and treble, and they need power, green power. So it's a wonderful opportunity. Wonderful. I mean, primarily for rural communities, but not exclusively rural. Urban. I mean, we have some here in around the city of Limerick, and indeed further out. It's why not? You know, we are the skill set is there. You know, let us walk together. We have strength in numbers. You know.
Just a quick question. Thank you. I think that's extremely inspiring. I think, Brian, you're, in terms of some of the questions you've been answering, I notice on the chat as well. Is wind a massive challenge? There seems to be lots of thinking and debate about wind alone, or how do you see that playing out?
Yeah, there's some great questions coming through, Seamus, and I'm reminded of discussions around 20 years ago, when at that stage, the amount of wind energy we had on our power system was probably about 3 or 4%. And there were a lot of applications coming in for wind farms, and it looked like it might go quickly up to something like 7.5%. And EirGrid at the time were concerned because there needed to be more analysis to prepare for this. What were the implications? Would we be able to manage it effectively? And through that decade of the early noughties, there was a lot of discussion, a lot of analysis, a lot of research undertaken, and it was felt that we could get up to 40% by 2020, and let's put the shoulder behind the wheel and aim for that. And you had a very interesting. There was a strong policy support for this. There was a strong industry engagement on this, and there was societal support for this. So you've gotten to the stage now where we're at 43%. This was unheard of 20 years ago. It didn't look like it was going to happen 10 years ago. And it didn't happen by itself. There was a significant amount of effort. It was challenging, and it was delivered on. So when we look at a 70% challenge, and some of the questions are talking about 2050, because the government has committed to zero emissions by 2050, these are great questions. And the question of whether we can do it or not is an open question. I think we've certainly proven that when there is a will, when there is support, when it is focused, when we look at solving the problems and making progress, doing the analysis, delivering the solutions, that we have shown that we can do it. And And certainly the analysis that we've done, the research we've done on the 70% by 2030 suggests it is feasible, but it is challenging. And and these are stretch targets. It is pushing out the boundaries of what we can do. But that's kind of that's what we're called to do. That's what we need to do, and that's what people are saying. We need to do more to stop the emissions. We need to do more on climate action, and this is the kind of activity that will deliver that. So it is challenging, but I think it is achievable.
And before we go to the breaks, and thanks for that, Liam, you clearly outlined, and I'm looking at a text here, one of the people who've come in to me in my phone are wondering, obviously, about the southwestern region. You talked about different regions have different challenges and maybe fitting into any one of the 4 boxes that you presented in terms of generation-led, developer-led, technology-led, and demand-led. If you look at the Southwest, what's the challenge there? Or can you give a kind of a picture of that now at this time?
Yeah, I think, Seamus, like the challenge that we actually have is like we have done, and the Southwest has been absolutely brilliant over the last number of years for the amount of renewables that we connected in and the community accepted to connect into the region. And I think now it's how do we make sure that we continue to connect to renewable generation, but also we do it by utilizing and maximizing the current infrastructure that we have. And it's also then making sure that the communities are benefiting from the renewable energy that's actually being generated in those communities. And I think the challenge that we actually have is making sure that the industry element potentially could be seen how we can actually get that into the Southwest region to grow it successfully as well. And I think when we look at the various different options that we have, is that I think the developer-led won't get us there, and therefore it is solely on its own. But in essence, it's going like, how do we then get the Southwest region and get the voice of Southwest region to make sure that we are meeting your needs and how the grid can develop in that region to meet the future needs that we actually have, and potentially it's getting large energy users to move into the region. And then it's also looking at the future potential of the money points, as an example, the money point site, and how we're going to do that. And then also how the Celtic interconnector can also support the region by the fact that we'll actually have better fiber connection coming in from France as well. So there's a number of different potentials in that, Seamus.
Okay, some of the questions will be dealt with in the breakout workshops, but that's a very interesting insight. Now, in terms of breakout, all you have to do is listen to James Claffey explain what you have to do, and that will allow each of you to get, I hope, your say and be able to ask questions. So James, if I hand over to you.
So everyone, we're just going to break you quickly into some breakout sessions now to answer the 2 questions on the screen. And I'm going to automatically assign people to breakout groups. Can I ask my facilitators and note takers not to join the room just for an extra second, and I will join them. So we're going to have about, James, we might go for about 35 minutes because we're a little bit pressed on time now, if that's okay. And we'll get people to come back in then for the feedback sessions then. So I'm just going to stop sharing for a minute and break people into groups.
I think we're back from the chat rooms, and I have to say it was very engaging conversations, I know, going around all of the chat rooms, and certainly the one I was at was extremely interesting, and some really good points being made, of which Kate will I'm sure summarize. So if I may start with the first chat room, who is involved in that?
That's Eileen. Jim.
Yeah, I think it was me. Yeah, we were the same. We had there was a little bit of, I suppose, we have enough of wind of turbines in Kerry. It kind of started off a little bit, but then there was really a general consensus that the renewable energy needs to be located everywhere across the country. and suitable to everybody. So the different types to be suitable to the different areas. We were talking as well about all different types of renewables like hemp and flax and all those different renewables, and the now is the time, we were talking as well, would be the time to definitely start up your community farms or your community wind groups, your community farms, that, you know, it's the time for change, really. Is there anybody else in my group? That was really it. Is there anybody else in my group who'd like to comment or add anything, if I've missed anything?
Shout if you wish. If anybody wants to go in there, please.
No, I think that was it. We were
okay. All right.
Yeah.
The next group, I think, Kate, is it you?
It is, yeah.
Yeah, I'm group 2. So I suppose the one of the comments just was relating to it in the kind of presentation from EirGrid, that maybe there could be more of a focus on the community led coming from EirGrid, given that it is government policy. And then I suppose one of the big themes of our group was that, you know, while everybody was very supportive and, you know, encouraged by the community-led approach, there needs to be supports there for that, and it needs to be consistent and long-term, not just a short-term project. And, you know, that it's a big ask for volunteers and for local communities. There are skill sets involved and big community investment and organisation. So, you know, the local authority was suggested as perhaps a partner, as long as it's still genuinely community led. And, you know, that really, I suppose, we're all doing a lot of these consultations because the times are urgent, and that, you know, rather than just a consultation at the outset of a project, whether it's developer or the big EirGrid project, that you would have ongoing genuine partnerships from the outset, and, you know, you would have that kind of equity built in, and rather than just a sort of a consultation. So I think that's probably just as well. The environmental concerns were mentioned, and I suppose everything from birds to peatlands to offshore wind in terms of the impact on fish, and, you know, noise pollution has been in the news a lot lately. So, you know, while we all recognise the need for renewable energy and are very supportive of it, I think, you know, we can't just forget, I suppose, the environmental concerns as well.
Okay, James, who's the next group? Who was involved?
That's
Brendan,
myself.
Brendan, isn't? Go ahead.
Yeah, so very quickly, there was general consensus that it will be a mix. There was recognition that it'll be a sort of a sensible mix is the best approach, with perhaps leaning towards the demand-led option, with offshore wind on the East Coast being a significant aspect to the thing. Michael had a question on the stability of that, and that's still a problem. There was a lot of discussion about the community potential, and the, you know, what can we do with that. And also there was an interesting sort of discussion on potential urban rural initiatives, that the community thing shouldn't just be a rural option. Now, there was a spanner in the works, really, was the potential problems with planning permission for these for community generation, and how that can kill a thing in its tracks. There was a lot of consensus on the need for state ownership in this, that it should be state owned. That was pretty much across the group, but I think, and there was 2 questions that we had, you know, the cost of overground cables versus underground. And also, Anne-Marie, if you want to come in, you had a question just briefly on the generation led or developers led. You had, what was your question, just if we finished there with it? think, have we lost Anne-Marie? Okay, well, look, anyway, look, there were the main points that we had.
Okay. Thank you very much, Brendan, and to the three chat rooms and the facilitators and the note takers. Seriously, I appreciate the work here tonight. We're coming towards the end, and before I give the last word to Liam, I just want to say this from an Irish Rural Link perspective. We really are appreciative of the people who turned up here tonight. We really want to get this discussion into different parts of Ireland, and we want people talking about it and trying to, I suppose, forage and figure out solutions to what will be a very difficult challenge or set of challenges over the next few years. And we all, on the one hand, need and want electricity, but we don't want it at any cost, and we want it in a way that it fits into our communities, that it gives benefit to our communities. And I think this is why EirGrid are to be complimented. It's not the first time they've sought ideas and views from people, and as Liam said, they are asking a great deal of questions to a range of groups all around the country, so that's to be welcomed. So to finish us shortly on time, Liam, I would like to give the floor to you to have the last word.
Seamus, I'd like to thank yourself and Irish Rural Link and everybody who's given up their time this evening, because like I know there's lots going on in everybody's life, and I really do appreciate the time that these consultations actually take. So I really do appreciate all your time, and we are really listening, folks. It's not like, so for me, these sessions are the most important thing that I can do today. Of everything I've been doing today, any part today, and I really do appreciate it. So I would urge you to, we'll take the feedback from today, and if there's other feedback that you want to give, please actually send it in to us. We are listening, and we want to hear your voices, so we get to a power system that we all can be proud of, that is world leading, but more importantly, that it delivers for us in our communities as well. So, and again, thanks Seamus, and thanks for the time this evening.
Thank you very much. And as Liam urges, please tell other people there's more sessions to come it's on our website. Please tell people to get interested and to submit, as Liam said in his presentation, direct to EirGrid by post, by email, by any way you wish. They are listening, in fairness, and I think they need to be, as indeed the policy makers who make these decisions. So you've participated and contributed tonight. Let's try and get as many people involved as possible. So good evening, everybody. Thank you for your attendance. Enjoy what's left of the evening, or is it the night? Thank you.